let's talk a little bit about some of the different powders that are available on the market. We have you have your super fine, which is more of a detail powder. Then you have your fine powder, which is regular, and that is what the most of us use. Most of the powders are just regular, and they have a larger grain. And then you have your super thick or ultra thick. Ultra high is what WOW calls it. This is more of a coarser grain, and you can actually see how big the grains are, and this is used to cover a wider surface, and it's not really for detailed images. So say I have this, background stamp by Hero Arts, and this is called Spice Marking. You can see that it's a rather detailed image. So we're going to ink this up. And anytime I have such a large stamp, I always ink it up upside down using an ink pad. I got to get a lot of Versamark on there. I'm going to use an embossing buddy because if I don't, when I use the ultra fine, it's going to get everywhere. And I'm just going to lay my cardstock down on my image. Just going to burnish that onto my cardstock. And we're going to need to work somewhat quickly because we're going to try several different powders. Okay, so you can see our image there. It's quite detailed. We're going to start off using just regular black. Now this is Ranger's regular black embossing powder. And I'm going to pick it up and just kind of shuttle it onto certain spots there. And then I'm going to take some super fine by WOW, and we're going to just test how different they work. I'll just shuttle that off, and I can already see a big difference between them. We'll just shuttle that back into our container here. And then we're going to use the black glint on the end, the sparkle powder. Just kind of getting a different look down our project. So I'm going to start off with my heat tool, and we're just going to heat set the entire project. It's a large project, so I'm just getting some heat going, just a little tiny bit here, heating through the back, and then I'm going to hold my heat tool in one place till it starts to melt, and then just slowly move my tool around. And you can kind of see that powder melting. You can see I'm holding my heat tool about 2 inches from my project. It's very easy when you're new to embossing to bring your tool closer and closer. You want to try to keep from doing that. And just kind of keep it moving, but you don't want to do the hair dry thing. Just kind of keep it in place because you'll get a much better result much faster, which will help you with less paper warping. This is a beautiful, beautiful image. I have been wanting this image for about a year. Every time I went to order something, it was always out. I finally got it. And our image is set. If you find that your paper is warping a lot, chances are you've really spent too much time heating your paper through, or maybe your paper is down on a surface, because you have to remember that you need to heat up your paper. And if you have your paper laying down, then you're trying to heat up your surface at the same time. It's working against your paper. So that's why I always hold my paper in the air and heating it through both sides. Try doing that. That will help to keep you from getting it warped. Now we have a lot of embossing powder on here, which is kind of pulling the paper. There's nothing I can do about that because I have end to end here. And it's looking pretty good. This is very, very fine, detailed, but you can really see here, and I'm going to try and zoom in on this as best I can. And you'll see this in a close-up that I'll have on this page. So in order, we have the regular powder here, we have the detail powder here, and we have the sparkle powder here. Now you can see here, these lines are not quite as detailed as right in here, which is where the super fine powder is. And that's really what's going to happen. You have larger grains of embossing powder, so you know they can only do fine detail as well. So if you have greetings that are really, really fine lined, the super fine powder is what you're looking for. And then over here we have that sparkle powder, and you can see it's just kind of a little sparkly. But overall, it's a beautiful image. And see, I can use this even though it's got 3 different powders on it. It's still beautiful to me. I love this. It's a very beautiful image. Now, just to continue with some of the different textures that we have here, or grains, size of grains, this down here is the Super Fine by Wow, and you can see that it really allows that really, really fine text from the stamp, and this is from the Snowy Sayings by Casual Fridays for the Stamp of Approval collection. That was in the holiday box. But it's got a really, really fine font. And this is the black. I stamped everything with the VersaFine Onyx Black ink. This one I didn't stamp really well, so I didn't emboss that. This one is done with just regular embossing powder, so which is also called fine powder. Not super fine, but fine. And it is a beautiful powder. I actually use it all the time. I love it. But you can see here where it's time of the year. The powders swelled, because what happens is when you heat the powders, they swell and they fuse together. So you can see that they swelled a little bit, and the I and the M and the M and the E, and down here, everything's just kind of run together. And as well, not as noticeable up top, but it has this little bit. You can see there's more white space in between the letters down here than there are up here. And then at the very top, I have, because this is inked up in a black pigment ink, I can use clear embossing powder. And this is the Brutus Monroe Super Fine Icicle, which is a detailed clear embossing powder. It worked beautifully, absolutely beautifully. And I love that because, again, it's clear. So it allows, even if it were to swell, it would allow the white to shine, or the vanilla in this case, to shine through. So that's a good option if you don't like to get a lot of little black flecks, which I know I don't. But the one difference between that, and just so you notice it, is it's not quite as shiny black because it's clear. So this is a little bit more, has a little bit more of a pop to it than the clear does. But you know, in the grand scheme of things, I mean, you get your point across. I think it works beautifully. So I hope that was helpful as well. Now there are all different types of ink pads that you can use underneath. Instead of just pigment inks, you have the actual embossing ink pads. Are they really necessary? An actual one that's just for embossing? I like the Versamark pad because I can stamp with it. It's a watermark pad. You know, I can use it like a traditional ink pad as well, just to get a light shade under of whatever color it is that I'm using. There's also colored embossing pads out there. I used to use them back when I first started. I felt like I needed it, but you really don't. And a good way to kind of get around that, if you're uncomfortable and you don't know where things are, just do them in little pieces. Do like this section, add some powder, then do another section, add some powder, so you can kind of see where you're going. That's a good way of getting around that, but they aren't really necessary to have. Now, there is also just regular dye-based inks that you can use as well. Is it as good a choice? I don't necessarily think so. So we have some distress inks here. So we'll take the red, and this is Barn Door, and we'll take an Ava's Flower here. Let's ink that up really well. Now, if you're using just dye-based inks, you need to have an ink that's going to remain a little bit more open, not really close itself off, be sucked in so quickly. I'm going to use clear embossing powder here, so you're going to have to work really quickly. So I'm going to stamp and quickly put it into the embossing powder. And because Distress ink stays wet longer on cardstock than regular dye-based ink, say, you know, a Stampin' Up! Ink pad or, you know, any other ink pad, that if it dries immediately, this isn't gonna work. But Distress ink remains a little wet, so you can actually emboss with it if you work quickly. And I can't stress that part enough. So by just adding some clear over it, you have whatever color that you're using. Now, if you're uncomfortable with working so quickly, another way to get around this is to just boost that with a Versamark pad. You're going to stamp first in Versamark, then add your ink. I don't ever really worry about cross-contaminating my ink pads with the Versamark, only because it is a watermark ink, and then stamp. And so you'll have the properties of the Versamark, which is really more of a pigment ink, and it'll stay a little bit longer, stay open a little longer on your paper. And you can see here, I actually got a better image using the Versamark, most likely because I had that extra boost of it on the paper. Now you saw how fast I did that, but you still had some of that ink get sucked in. So whenever I do this, I always do it using a Versamark pad. But it's a great way to just boost that color and get that color of something that you don't necessarily have a matching color in and you don't have a pigment pad of. I do this all the time with Stampin' Up! Inks. I do it with any kind of other ink using the Versamark pad. So to kind of review, you know, you have lots of different grains of powder. I encourage you to just kind of play around with them. You know, having a black, a white, and a clear in the superfine is probably something that would be a good thing to collect over time. You know, clear would be obviously the best choice because it could work with just about anything, you know, if funds are limited. But there is a big difference between the two, and sometimes you just have that image that just, you know, regular just won't do. I encourage you to play with them with some of the different dye-based inks that you have. Always the Versamark pad is a must. The Versamark is a pad that every single stamper should own. You know, you have lots of different powders that react differently to different colored cardstock. Here I have, you know, four different colors of embossing powder here, but yet you can see how different they are on the various cardstocks. Just so you can see, I have silver, Wow Silver Pearl. This is regular powder, so it's just the regular or also classified as fine grain, and that's up top. And you can really see how different it is. It takes a little bit more of a silverish tone on some deeper colors than the lighter shades. It's just really almost like a darker pearlish watermark. You can kind of see how it's pearl. It's very pretty. I love pearl powders. Pearl powders as well as pewter. That's also a very pretty shade. Now right here we have a powder called Iridium, and this is an embossing glitter by Wow. Now it looks like a gold, but it's not as a metallic-y gold, and you can see here, depending on what color cardstock it's on, it's actually a little bit more copper. Now it's interesting because when you actually look at the powders themselves, and it's not, you can't see it so well here, but when I had it on white cardstock, you had a little bit of blue in there, or like a purplish blue, but it ended up being a little bit more copper in tone, depending on the color that it was on. And right below that, I have the Wow Metallic Gold Sparkle Embossing Glitter, and that is just a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous powder. Love that. And this one was probably the most interesting. This is Shocking Pink Embossing Glitter. Now, this was probably the one that had the broadest variety. You can see here on the darker shades, it was kind of more of a burgundy-ish color. The red just created almost like a watermark, but a very cool red. And then the same thing here on this primrose. The green was interesting. It's really almost a true red on green, or almost like a rose, pinkish rose. And then here on the blues, the lighter shade really allowed the pink to really shine through, whereas the turquoise, it just became purple. And that was very cool. A very, very different look. And then here I have a little experiment This is just regular black powders. And then these are all done, the sparkle powders right here, these 4. And this is the Brutus Monroe Gold. And these 2 right here, these 2 I should say, I over embossed. And you can kind of see the difference between a regular embossed gold, you can see how shiny it is, and then here, when it's over embossed, you can see that it really spread out more. So it's not as fine a detail anymore. It kind of really soaked into the paper. It got a little flat and kind of tarnished. Now, not so bad. I've had other embossing powders really tarnish and turn an ugly shade. And you can see here with the black, it's not pretty at all. It's just very flat and kind of ugly. I don't really care for it at all. It got really, really wide. I tried to over emboss this one. Didn't quite work as well. It started to, and that's when I really went for it here. And then here, just remember, you can use other types of adhesives as well. You have that double-sided sticky tape that we used earlier, and these are actually mini glue dots. But whenever you have something like this, you want to hold your heat tool a little further away and just to give it a chance to really melt, because you have something in between your paper and your embossing powder, whereas here it's really just ink, so it's really paper directly onto the paper. Now when you're using a coarser grain like this is an enamel, and it's classified, this is the Stampin' Up! Glassy Glaze. I'm not even sure if they still sell this. I had this years ago, but it's the same as the Ranger UTEE, which is the ultra thick embossing enamel. And in the Wow powders, they classify it as super high, and this covers a wider area. You'll generally find it mostly in the clear, and this is used for different techniques such as cracked glass, which we will have a tutorial on, and a couple other things, but this is not at all for any fine grains. And when you're heating this, you want to approach it a little bit slower because the grains are coarser. Same thing like here. I had big flecks of silver, and this one shows it the best. Big flecks of silver glitter in here. Let's see if I can zoom in on that. And if you were to approach that too quickly or too closely with your heat tool, you have an opportunity to blow that away because it doesn't latch onto the stickiness as much. Same thing with the enamel. Heating it a little bit from the bottom always helps because it kind of helps it to just kind of activate and get warm so that it starts to fuse together, these little particles here. And that's a really fun, it's a fun product to work with, and you can get a really nice gloss over your images as well. Here's our finished card. You can see we've got that really great embossed background, that edging that we did. And then we have just a very simple, straightforward card, but I mean, it's the embossing that's the wow factor. I love it. And our final card is, I just decided to leave it black and white. I could have colored it in, but I decided that, you know what, I don't do very much in black and white cards, and you know, I'm going to challenge you to do a little bit because it's kind of, it's at its basic core, but you've got that really beautiful gloss from the embossing. And it's interesting because even though we have the 3 different embossing powders on here, it's awesome. I love this stamp. This is just great. And just a very simple, straightforward greeting, you know, adding just a little bit of extra black here so that it stands out. Simple matting. It's awesome. So thanks so much for joining me on this introduction to embossing powders. I hope maybe you learned a little something. I'm sure you already knew how to emboss, but you know what? It's a great technique. It's simple, it's fun, and it's definitely a wow factor to all your cards. I can't wait to see what you create. Now it's your turn. See you next time. Bye-bye.